Hello, my name is Steve Prince, and I'm the Director of Engagement and Distinguished Artist in Residence at the Muscarella Museum at William and Mary. Welcome to a new series produced by Black Art in America called Blacklite, Reflections on African American Art. Each episode, I will do a comparative analysis of two artists' works. And the key areas that I'm going to focus on in their works will be the design, the content, and the style of their works. The first two artists in this series will be Benny Andrews and Jacob Lawrence. Now, you see, I had the wonderful opportunity to meet both of these artists. I met Jacob Lawrence in 1992 when I was a graduate student, and he spoke at Delaware Art Museum in Wilmington. I remember like it was yesterday, sitting up in the front row with my sketchbook open, and as he spoke and went through about 100 slides, and he talked about his journey, and he talked about the impact that he was able to make with his art and the spaces and the places that it took him. And I meticulously made a drawing of him and took notes the entire time he spoke. And at the end of that talk, I made my way through the crowd and asked him if he would sign my book. And he did. In 2006, I had the wonderful pleasure of meeting Benny Andrews. Now, at this point in my life, I was a little bit further advanced in my artistic career, and I had an exhibition that was adjacent to his. He had a series up called the Migrant Series, and I had a show called Urban Epistle Endnotes. And I remember looking across the gallery to him, and he had a crowd all swamped around him, and he was fielding questions back and forth. And as the crowd thinned, I made my way to him and I shook his hand and I thanked him for his contributions as an artist. But I thanked him for the way in which he impacted my life. So the two works that I'm going to focus on in the works, which is very hard to do when you talk about two very prolific artists, but I found two works that I thought could begin to speak to not only the depth of what they're doing in terms of their work, but also begin to see the style and the way in which they were able to render their stories and information through their creations. The first piece that I'm going to share with you is one by Jacob Lawrence, and it's called Food Had Doubled in Price Because of the War. It's a 12 by 18 inch tempera hardboard painting, part of his Migration series. And the second work that I'll share with you is a work by Benny Andrews called Harlem, USA. It's part of his Migrant series. It's oil and fabric and collage. And it's a rather large image that's 54 inches by 72 inches. Now, if we want to delve into these pieces and begin to speak about that from a comparative analysis standpoint, one of the key things that kind of stands out to me when we start talking about Jacob Lawrence's work is the way in which he utilizes space in terms of his design and composition. Now, there are two colors that kind of stand out for me when I look at this work. One being the red of the dress that the woman is wearing, and the other one being is very dominant throughout the composition is green. Now, this is part of a Migration series. So he was speaking about that whole movement from the South going north and the ways in which African Americans were looking for a better place to live, looking for greater opportunities. But he also was speaking of the hardships of that movement and when times got pretty lean and what people had to do in order to make it through. You can see the weight that's being displaced upon the mother's shoulders as she's cutting at the fat back. You see the hard angle of her body. You see the way in which she's reduced her face and took away the features, and you see the double plaits kicking to both sides of her head. The thing that's so stark is that little child at the end of the table is peeking over the edge, his eyes wide open, looking at the way in which his mother is working to provide for the family. But another element that's really prevalent within the image is the sparseness. You begin to see the sense of poverty, to see the sense of lack. But one thing that stands true through that sense of poverty and lack is that spirit to make a way out of no way. Compositionally, he creates a strong anchor of a design of a triangle inside the composition that's being played out between the candle up high, angle down to the mother's shoulders, down to the child's eyes. And so by the design mechanism called proximity, we have that strong anchoring inside of the composition that holds those elements together. The use of texture inside of this composition on the floorboards, and you see, and almost can feel the hardwood floor beneath their feet. And the background wall, you can almost feel the layers of paint that are layered there. And you can see that large space, that large openness, be speaking of the new opportunity, but it also talks of the harshness of that opportunity. See, red and green, design-wise, those are complementary colors, the colors that lie directly across each other on the color wheel. And Jacob Lawrence understood these colors very well as he utilized them inside of his composition to draw you in and to use that strong contrast that not only shows these figures bouncing off of that background space, but it also begins to show you the depth and the feeling and the motion, almost like pain or like blood coursing through the veins, working to survive. Now, if we were to slide into a work by Benny Andrews, and we begin to interrogate this image, and we think about it comparatively to that of what we just saw in terms of Jacob Lawrence's work, one thing that stands out is the way in which Benny Andrews utilizes and creates his composition. And one of the things that he does is he also plays around that bigness of space, the sparseness. But this piece is part of a series called the Migrant Series, where he's dealing with some of the same things that Jacob Lawrence is dealing with, people moving from the south and heading north. If you look to the left side of the compositional space, you see that there's a grouping of people standing there in reds and blues and greens and satchels upon their shoulders and bags inside their hands, and as they are looking for those new opportunities. As you see a couple walking down the middle of the street as their shadows are cascading across the ground, as a child runs up to them and trying to sell them a newspaper. Now, the artist, Benny Andrews, he was into some interesting things in that he was not only showing you just with the compositional space to get across this idea of migration, but he was embedding in there small little symbolic elements, little nuggets for you as the viewer. You see that the newspaper in the kid's hand is the Amsterdam News. The Amsterdam News is one of the oldest continuous African-American newspapers in the country. That was very prevalent up in New York and very prevalent up in Harlem. He's passing it out to them. But over to the right side of the compositional space, you see a man holding a newspaper, and he's holding the New York Times. You know, and that was not by accident that he puts this in there inside the composition as he shows the inner workings of the city. He shows kids sitting at the bus stop, and he shows the couple walking down the street. He shows the vendor selling some food on the side of the street. You know, I can imagine people coming from the south for the first time and now seeing this big city, the big skies full of buildings, full of people, the dense pack of bodies working inside there. The strong diagonals that he uses compositionally coming from the left and the right that's pulling us into the piece as if it's inviting us. But also the large scale by which Benny Andrews creates this piece, basically almost 4 feet by 6 feet in scale. He makes it almost life-size. So we are drawn into the image also by its scale, and we almost can be walking right behind the couple going into this new world. But also, look at the angle of the people's heads to the left of the compositional space as they look up and they see the word loans, and below it they see the word drugs. I don't think that was by happenstance that Benny Andrews puts this into that composition, because you have people who are coming from a lack and looking for new opportunities, looking for a way in which they could make a better living. Many of them are getting caught up in the loan system and taking money and going deeper into debt. But then also you think about with the new city and the big city issues and that it has, and the way in which drugs play a role within the African American community, and bring about a similar kind of hardship that we see that's being burdened by the woman that's in the Jacob Lawrence composition as she's cutting at the fat back, trying to make a way out of nowhere. Also inside this composition, you see the use of red and green, those complementary colors, those hot colors that are just bouncing out of the composition. This time, the artist, Benny Andrews, uses them onto the left and the right side of the compositional space, and he uses it on both of those diagonals leading into the city, bringing us into it. As you see in the background, that long pole, telephone pole in the sky, sitting in the middle of the composition, and then you see the large, immense sky up above them. Be speaking of new opportunities, be speaking of a new life, but also showing you the diversity of beings, the diversity of that experience, from those who are just entering into the community, for those who are then there long established as the man in the business suit, holds a newspaper, learning this new land, this new space. So both of the artists, compositionally, do some very similar things in terms of the sparseness of space, the use of texture, the use of color to draw our eyes throughout the composition and to anchor us and to get us to follow certain figures and read their bodies so that the deeper narrative could be spoken to us. So ladies and gentlemen, this is our first step into looking a little bit deeper at these artists' works, looking at these masterworks that they were able to create, utilizing their design and utilizing their style and dropping upon us the beautiful content that is so prevalent within the African American community and the arts that we see coming from African Americans. So I encourage you, come next time and join us as we continue to shine a black light on African American art. Thank you.